Okay, cool. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Scarlett. I'm going to be chairing tonight's discussion. Can everyone hear me okay? First of all, yeah? Okay, good. Too loud. You want me? Is that better? Is that better? Okay, perfect. Okay, I'm delighted to welcome you all to tonight's event, hosted by Manchester Momentum, in this iconic venue. I'm sure you'll agree. We've got a panel of really, really fantastic speakers tonight to discuss what we think is a really, really prescient issue. And we're thrilled to see so many people here as well. I'm going to start by saying a few words about why we've organised this event. Then I'll hand over to our wonderful speakers. Each speaker will speak for 10 minutes, and if speakers could be diligent about keeping to the time, that would be great, if possible. Ash? And then after the speakers, we're going to have a short period of time for questions, which Alice kind of outlined how that's going to work. I'll ask you to stick your hand up at the end of the speakers, and we'll collect questions then. Okay, so why have we decided to hold this event tonight? First of all, we know that New Labour's record on immigration is poor, to say the least. Following Tony Blair's election in 1997, the Home Office introduced increasingly restrictive policies towards migrants, asylum seekers and refugees. This included the dispersal of asylum seekers on a no-choice basis, the removal of the right to work, introduction of registration and identity cards, the opening up of detention centres and, of course, increased deportations. Under the Tories, Theresa May's announcement of the hostile environment as Home Secretary marked the emergence of an even more violent and punitive immigration system. More recently, the Windrush scandal has demonstrated that the hostile environment not only directly affects people without the right to remain, as well as people seeking asylum, but also British citizens. We've also seen a criminalising of dissent, as in the case of the Stanford 15, and we're lucky enough to have Ben with us here tonight, who will hopefully speak a bit more about his experience around that. Here in Manchester, there was a really phenomenal community response to Owen's case just a few months ago. In fact, I think someone mentioned earlier, it's about 4 months to the day, when we saw literally hundreds of people gathered in here in NIAMOS. I'm sure many people here tonight would have been there as part of an emergency meeting in response to Owen's planned deportation. So in a way, it feels sort of symbolic that we're back here tonight and talking about the same issues. We also think it's important to acknowledge that many people don't have that same level of community support or exposure or support from MPs, as Owen's case received, as we've seen with the recent deaths of at least 5 men who have been deported to Jamaica at the hands of the state. We heard that recently. I'm sure Owen, when he has his chance to speak, will say a bit more about that wider context and his own experience as well. We hope that the Corbyn project represents an opportunity to begin dismantling some of this stuff and dismantling the UK's punitive immigration system. Labour Party politicians have spoken out against the Windrush scandal. Labour is now committed to closing Yarl's Wood, and Momentum has recently announced that it will urge the government to close all detention centres, which we see as a really encouraging step in the right direction. Having said all that, there is still so much more to do. So against this backdrop, we hope tonight's discussion will open up a bit of a conversation, really, about what a socialist Labour Party's immigration policy would look like if it was built on principles of fairness and solidarity. This includes having clear ideas for what would replace the regimes that we dismantle, so that what follows is humane and just. We also hope to reflect on the role that the Labour grassroots could play in tangible policy changes, and how we might work to build alliances and of course support other grassroots organisations who've been really leading campaigns on these issues. And I know that many of those organisations and activists will be here tonight. Shout out to These Walls Must Fall at the back. Woo! And yeah, that's kind of all I wanted to say is a bit of an introduction, really. You might notice that we've got a couple of speakers missing. Unfortunately, Aderonke can't be here due to some very unforeseen circumstances. Mary will be joining us shortly. So I think without further ado, we'll just go straight into our first speaker. It's going to be Owen. And Owen Haisley, who is NC and campaigner, and hopefully he's going to be speaking a bit about his recent experiences. And I'm going to hand over to you now, Owen.
I can sit down, right? Brilliant. First of all, I just want to say a big thank you to each and everybody that was here at the NIAMOS the night before the 6th of Feb, supporting, even before that, like, because when I was in the detention centre in Harmsworth, I'll be truthful, I didn't know what was going to happen, because when they detained me, they basically said to me that they were going to take me they detained me on the 25th of January at a reporting centre. But before that, I'd already had ongoing, waiting on an ongoing response from the Home Office through documents which was submitted to them. So as far as I knew, they couldn't detain me for anything until they gave me a response for these documents. But on the 25th of January, they falsely detained me, I think, because they misled me. When they detained me, they walked me into the back of the room, exit doors were open, van doors were open, 6 security guys stood up, and there was a security lady. But I thought everything was all right. I've got nothing to be afraid of. I'll just tell them I'm awaiting a response for the documents and everything will be cool. That wasn't enough. They told me to get in the back of the van. They made me to believe that they were going to take me to a local police station and find out if what I was saying to them was correct, then they'll let me go. They took me to the police station, they left me. 24 hours later, I got picked up by I got took to not Harmonsworth, yeah, the one in Lincoln, detention centre in Lincoln. Morton Hall, that's the one, Morton Hall. Got taken to Morton Hall, and then from Morton Hall, I got taken to Harmonsworth Detention Centre in London. And that's when I was able to look at the documents which they would try to serve on me, which told me from 5 working days from presenting these documents, you will be put on a chartered flight, landed in Kingston, Jamaica, flying via Panama. And this what was odd, like, it didn't have no date or anything, it just had an open window. An open window meant from 5 days of serving up them documents, there's an open window of 3 months where they can remove you out the UK without any notification or anything like that. So as far from me, not knowing how could I contact my legal team, because we didn't have a date, we didn't have a time or anything. I didn't, contacting family, contacting anybody. But anyway, I ended up at Harmonsworth Detention Centre. Speaking to my legal team, was trying to get things sorted. I thought I would have been out of there within like a few days or something, a week at least. But no, it wasn't like that. And basically, things got a bit closer and closer and close to the 6th of Feb, because you got to understand, I read about this chartered flight 3 weeks before the 25th of January when I was at home, because I like to check on the reggae music and everything in Jamaica. And it said, front page news, this is what the front page news were. There was a convict flight of 50 convicts from the UK landed in Kingston, Jamaica on the 6th of Feb. rapists, murderers, traffickers. They're going to be accompanied by 190 security personnel. When they land in Jamaica, the Jamaican police, the Jamaican army are going to greet them, process them. Anyone of interest, they're going to keep contact with them. Anyone other than that, they're just going to let them go. That's how they were going to deal with things. And I got a bit worried. I got very worried about that, because I knew about it, but there was nothing at all in the papers, nothing at all on any UK websites about this chartered flight. And I ended up speaking to a few of my friends, contacting a few of my friends, and it was one of Jamil and one of my friends, Helen, contacted me while I was in there. They spoke to me. Helen said about Jamil and what he does with the campaign and stuff and rapport and everything. And they spoke to me about a petition. I've heard about petitions, don't get me wrong, I've heard about petitions and what they can do. But when you've got about 2 weeks before you're due to be deported on a chartered flight, and all I know is that you've got to hit over 100,000, supporters, signed signatures for it to be heard, for it to be listened to. I just told Jamil, I'll be honest with you, I just said to him, yeah, okay, cool. But I wasn't thinking about that. I just said, anything helps. I contacted a lady from Movement for Justice called Karen, who was a massive help. I spoke to her last year when I was in detention as well. And for some reason, her number was in my phone, because when you get to a detention center, they take your mobile phone off you and issue with a mobile phone, because you're not allowed a smartphone or anything. So luckily, for some reason, Karen's number was on my SIM card still, and it was probably one of the only numbers out of about 10 emergency numbers that came up. And I contacted Karen and explained the situation. Well, here's another bonus for that. Well, a day, 2 days after that, I received phone calls from national newspapers. Got to understand, I do music, right? I do music, and not even my music has got out there as much as this whole thing. So to have national papers ringing me, but you know what? It needed to get out there to make people aware. I've never been shy of what I've done. It shouldn't have happened, because the reason why I was getting deported was because of an offence which I served a 12-month prison sentence for. But that was in 2015, ended in 2016. I'm no longer on license. I've done my time for my crime. I've done my rehabilitation. I deserve a second chance, like anybody else who's been to prison and done their rehabilitation. I'm not a repeat offender. Over the last 12 years in Manchester, I've worked with over 2,000-3,000 young people doing music workshops in a whole 16 boroughs of Manchester, Greater Manchester. Worked for 3 councils continuously in one go. So for my 5% negativity, they've erased 95% of my positivity. And that's not just community work, that's music over the 29 years in Manchester. But I was in Harmondsworth, getting back to that, and the petition, I got an update on the petition, 6,000 people, then it was 8,000 people, 12,000 people, a few days to go, about 5-6 days to go. And then all of a sudden it was 80,000 people, 90,000 people, 100,000 people. And it was basically up until 10:30 on the 5th of February, 6th of February, where I had to call here and everybody was here. And I had to tell my boys that the injunction had been rejected, and I was definitely going to be on the chartered flight. But up until 10:30, I got a last-minute reprieve through the help of the 107,000 people petition that you guys have signed and supported, along with MPs that are intervened, along with the national papers. I wasn't asking for to be freed. I was just asking for a fair review on my case, review to be looked at properly. I know I've only got about 30 seconds or something, but yeah, kind of a minute, yeah? Right, yeah, but, right, I just think a few things, I I've been in, a few things need changing. Like a few things need implementing because the conditions, I think detention centres should be closed down. Them places, like, before I went in the detention centre, I was an outgoing person, very lively and everything. I still am, but it's more of an act of through what I'm hiding. And that is, whilst I was in detention, come out of detention centre, it's mentally disturbed me a bit, as in, I'm now having anxiety, I'm now panicking. And now when I go to report every Friday, I'm worried about them telling me I have to go back into the room even though my case is still ongoing. I'm out on an immigration bail, which is basically, I can't work, I can't sign on, I can't go seek no education, I can't go and rent property, private or even, with the council or anything. I'm in a state of limbo and I don't know what they, the detention centre should be closed down. This immigration bill where they stop people from working, they stop people from benefits, they stop people from seeking education. I don't know how that's helping somebody. I've got to say I'm lucky compared to some others because I've got support from family, I've got support from friends, I've got support from the community. Others haven't got support. They've served their time for, say, example. I'm just going to say an example of a drug offence. And they've reformed and everything, but now they've been put on an immigration bail where they can't do anything. That's going to drive them possibly to go and do the same thing as what got them in trouble in the first place. So I don't understand that at all. Things need to change. The only people that can change that, we need to get together, communities, starting from the young ones as well, because they're the next generation. And we just need to get together, work together, get these things in place, because it's not just me. I'm not just sitting here talking about me, because there was another 49 guys with me, young as me, half my age, 22 years old. I'm 45 years old. They were young enough to be my sons. One of the lads that I was in the cell with, he was unfortunately deported for a 14-month driving offence. And he's in Jamaica now, fearing for his life. They don't tell you things about what they say to you. Yeah, you're deported, everything will be cool. It's not the truth. If you get deported, you don't get deported for 1 year. You're deported for 10 years plus. No one's going to hire you if the front page news is you're a murderer, you're a rapist, you're a trafficker. And any country, if you get deported and you go look for work, it comes up on your record. So no one's gonna pay attention to you. And then because you've been on the front page news, you've been highlighted, your names have been highlighted, you've been, you're out there, you're a sitting target. You're a sitting target for everyone. Everyone thinks that you've got money or this or whatever, you're a sitting target. It's hard. I just need, we can only make things change to tell the ones at the higher places that they need to change this. Because I just want, once again, if it weren't for you guys here and the other 100,000 people, I wouldn't be here now. I wouldn't be here now. So I'm not just going to sit down and keep it to myself. I want to do something, whatever it takes, to help others that are in my situation and that are going to be experiencing the situation. Sorry for going on, but thanks.
Thank you so much, Owen. We are going to move on quite swiftly, and I'm going to introduce our next speaker now, who is Afzal Khan MP for Manchester Gorton, and also Shadow Immigration Minister. So I'm going to hand over.
Thank you very much. Let me start by first of all saying, I love Manchester, and Manchester got amazing people and amazing buildings. I have never been in this building. And look, it's great. And the stage, the way it's set up, it's cool. I've never had a stage like this as well. So well done to the organizers. Yeah, go on. They put in some effort, haven't they? And the second thing I want to say before I get to my set script, as a shadow immigration minister, I need to be very careful what I say. Daily Mail will be ready. I want to say this to Owen. You know, you talked about your campaign, and I don't think anybody should go through what you went through. But I've been involved with lots of campaigns, and even more campaigns I've seen. I've never seen anything like your campaign. It started in the weekend, and it just went up. And the next day, Monday, when my office opened, my phone was red hot. My staff, they weren't able to do anything but keep answering the phone. And Owen is not my constituent. So it really was pretty impressive, actually, the campaign in such a short time, how it got to the national level. And I'll talk a little bit more about these flights. But actually, it actually helped so many other people who were there on that flight. So all those people who were engaged in that campaign, well done. You actually achieved something in such a short time. Pretty impressive. I'm going to talk basically Labour's position on deportation and detention tonight. Before I do that, I probably want to set the scene. I suppose mainly looking at the government, what they're doing, what are their aims and objectives. The coalition government, when it started, going back now 8 years or so, there were two key aspects that they were playing with. And the first one was to bring down net migration to the tens of thousands. You still hear them. We want to bring it down tens of thousands. So this is sort of one of the key aspects, key plank of their game. And at the heart of it, I think, ultimately is that this target itself is a bogus target backed up by no research of rationale, apart from being a good soundbite, because they knew it will help them with the votes. There's nothing behind this policy itself. It has done harm to our economy, led to the scapegoating of migrants, and interestingly, in all these 8 years, it never has been met. Every year, the government has actually failed the target they've set. The second pledge was made by Theresa May to create a really hostile environment for illegal migration. This is what it was all about. The government at the time was warned that this hostile environment policy will lead to discrimination, and that is exactly what has happened. They were warned before even they brought this hostile environment. She was warned, and this is exactly what has happened. And in this March, the High Court ruled that the right to rent scheme directly causes landlords to discriminate against prospective tenants on racial and nationality grounds. And furthermore, that the government has provided no evidence that it is actually achieving its stated aim. So it is discriminating, but there's no evidence that it's actually achieving what the government is saying they're trying to achieve. And that was to reduce illegal migration. The Windrush crisis revealed something rotten at the heart of this government. A blurring of the line between looking like an immigrant and being an immigrant. And we can see now that race and immigration cannot be separated. When they were bringing in the hostile environment, the coalition government coordinated a cross-departmental focus on strategic approach to denying services to migrants. And since Windrush, we have seen no such coordinated focus attempt to remedy this great injustice. The government's crocodile tears for the Windrush generations were brought into sharp relief in February of this year, when they restarted charter flights to Jamaica. Mass deportation on chartered planes is a brutal way of responding to the current migration panic. The nature of the process means that people can be bundled out of the country when they have not yet exhausted all their avenues of appeals and without due process. To be clear, the Labour Party does not condone people staying in this country illegally, not least because living here without legal status is likely to push someone into exploitation. However, there are not enough checks and balances in the removals process to make sure that those with the rights to be here are not being targeted. The charter flight to Jamaica was suspended at the height of the Windrush scandal, when we discovered that at least 164 people were wrongly detained or removed by the Home Office, and 19 of those individuals have now died. It is a national scandal that any single person was wrongfully removed from the UK. It is an insult to the Windrush generation that the government restarted charter flights without the Windrush lessons learned review had even been completed. The government has failed to show that they have the process in place to make sure the wrong people do not end up on charter flights. Not least because many of the people supposed to be on the first flight, including Owen here, were taken off it after public outcry forced the government to re-examine his case. There were more than 50 people who were supposed to be deported, and at the end, 29 were deported. And what that means, a reduction of 42%. Clearly, it wasn't right what the government was doing, that the number actually had to go down 42%. So this brings us to immigration detention, as many of those removed will have taken from inside detention. So I believe that the UK's immigration detention system is a stain on our national conscience. We are the only country in Europe that detains people indefinitely. Scandals like Brook House have revealed truly abhorrent conditions in migration centers. There's a widespread crisis of self-harm in immigration detention. Stephen Shaw's report on the issue found that the current safeguards for vulnerable people were not working effectively enough. Labour has called for the closure of Yarlswood Detention Centre and for the millions of pounds it takes to run it to the use instead of to support for the victims of trafficking and domestic abuse. We have been making the case for a time limit for some time, and we called it in our 2017 manifesto, and Windrush has only made these demands more urgent. The good news is that this year we came very close to handling the indefinite detention, ending it in the country. My own amendments to the immigration bill have been supported by cross-party, including even some Tories and the DUP MEPs to defeat the government. But the difficulty we're at the moment facing is the paralysis the government actually is in. Nothing is happening. So whenever actually this thing does move, I'm confident that we will be able to reduce this, bring this indefinite detention to an end. So I just want to quickly, last minute or so, I want to look at Theresa May, because the hostile environment is all about her. Her whole tenure, actually, when you think about it, she's the architect of this cruel, ineffective immigration system, which will reverberate through the lives of many people throughout Britain. Her failure on immigration are too many to list. She failed on refugees, on citizenships, on fees, on human rights. She dismantled people's appeals rights, made the immigration system so complex and expensive that it's almost impossible to navigate. She resisted resettling refugee children even when the Dubs amendments compelled her to. So the front and the center in her legacy is the hostile environment, which culminated in the Windrush crisis. Theresa May cut the border forces and turned our teachers, nurses, landlords into immigration officers. So a Labour government, at the end, I will say is this. Under Jeremy Corbyn and Diane Abbott at the Home Office, will dismantle the hostile environment and end indefinite detention. We will ensure proper compensation for the Windrush generation and a new approach to EU citizens to make sure no one is left behind. We will build an immigration system based on our country's needs rather than scaremongering and scapegoating about migrants. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Afzal. That was a really useful overview of Labour's current position. I just want to remind people at this point, if you have any questions for our lovely speakers, to write them on your piece of paper, and we will be collecting them after the speakers are finished, and we'll put some of them to the speakers in the Q&A session. I'm going to move on now. Hi, Mary's joined us. Hi, Mary. I'm going to move on now to our next speaker, who doesn't need much of an introduction, I don't think, but we have Ash Sarkar with us here tonight, journalist and editor at Novara Media. So I'll hand over to you, Ash.
Hi, thank you all so much for coming here. You make the cruel and bitter North seem very welcoming for an arrogant and shitty Londoner. What I want to do with my 10 minutes is I want to talk a bit about the history of immigration controls. And I don't just want to talk about legislation. I want to talk about how is it that politicians are able to create a mood in the public that we want to see other working class people who happen to come from a different country, or maybe they just have a different skin color, punished. Right? How does that happen? Because borders aren't natural objects, they're made. And racism isn't a natural phenomenon. It too is made, and I want to talk about how it is made. Lots of people in this room might remember when Blair became Prime Minister for a second time after 2001. David Blunkett was his Home Secretary, and he became obsessed with asylum seekers. And I was like 9 at this time, and I didn't really know what an asylum seeker was. All I knew was that they were everywhere. Asylum seekers everywhere, like in your fridge, in the playground, everywhere. Just knew this word. And there was a local election campaign a few years later where the BNP were doing fairly well, particularly around, Essex and Hertford, that sort of ring around London. And a journalist from The Guardian went to a place called Broxbourne. If you've never been there, you've got no reason to go there. It's got like a big Marks and Spencer's, and that's it. To interview people about how they felt about asylum seekers. And they interviewed a woman called Maureen and asked Maureen how she felt about asylum seekers. And she'd been a lifelong Labour voter who was considering voting BNP. And she said, well, I'm just sick. I'm sick of seeing asylum seekers everywhere I go. I'm sick of seeing them. I'm sick of going to the post office, watching them collect their gyro. I'm sick of seeing them. And then the journalist did a little bit of research. You know what they found? There was not a single asylum seeker in Broxbourne. So she'd just been seeing brown people and losing her shit, right? She's just, oh my God, freaking out. And so that means that you've got to do a bit more historical digging. How is it that race and immigration get twinned together? And how is it that race, immigration, and a sense of national crisis, national decline, gets twinned together? And I think you've got to go back to 1968. Now, in 1968, lots of different things were happening. In France, they were kicking off. They were having a great time. Here, we had Enoch Powell, and we also had a Labour government introduce some of the most draconian immigration legislation that this country had ever seen, the 1968 Immigration Reform Act, which drastically impeded the rights of Commonwealth citizens to come here and make a life for themselves. It was one of the most drastic pieces of immigration legislation ever drafted. But let's go to Enoch Powell for a second, his infamous rivers of blood speech. The interesting thing about Enoch Powell's speech, lots of people focus on his sort of, ancient Greek and ancient Roman references because, he fancied himself as a bit of a poet. So I stand like the Roman and I see the river Tiber foaming with blood. But the interesting thing about his speech is that most of it he doesn't say in his own voice. He claims to be speaking on behalf of one of his constituents. And what he claims in this speech is that one of his constituents comes up to him, exchanges a word or two about the weather, and then says, in 15 or 10 years' time, the black man will have the whip hand over the white man. So just bear that in mind. We're expected to believe that somebody just came over and was like, oh, nice weather we're having, by the way. In 10 years, the black man's going to have his hand, have the whip hand over the white man. But it's important. It's important that what Enoch Powell was able to do was ventriloquize his own racism. And what he did is that he said, this isn't my racism. Well, I don't know where this came from. It's this working class constituent's racism, right? So Enoch Powell, a member of the elite, draws on the voice of a working class person, say this is their racism. It was a really striking speech for lots of reasons. And one of the most striking things about it is that Enoch Powell might have fallen from power, but Powellism lived on. And when he wrote about seeing Commonwealth migration, so migration of black people, of Asian people, subjects whom England had formerly colonized, he said it was like watching a nation busily engaged in building its own funeral pyre. And you can see similar language, the potential fire conflagration, when Rachel Reeves, a Labour MP for Leeds, said that her own constituency was like a tinderbox, going to go up in race riots any second. It's like, playing Buckaroo, just one more brown person like on the top and then you can see the legacy of Powellism in Margaret Thatcher's own language, swarms of migrants coming to this country. She built on some of the immigration legislation that had been introduced by her predecessors, including Labour governments. She got rid of birthright citizenship. She took a very authoritarian line on immigration. And when after decades of Tory rule, Tony Blair came in, this is one of my earliest memories was my mum voting in the 1997 election. And I remember she got like a massive watermelon afterwards. So she took me to the voting booth and then we got a watermelon. And then Labour won and she was really happy. And I was like, yeah, there must have been some good fucking watermelon. I don't know why I told that story. Is that for lots of people of colour in this country, they didn't trust Blair on economic policy, but he made noises about, a certain kind of cosmopolitan anti-racism. Trevor Phillips gets put in charge of the Equalities Commission. The McPherson report talks about institutional racism, that term which had been the sort of province of radical anti-racist movements in the 1980s suddenly gets state recognition. But it doesn't last. Only 2 years after the McPherson report uses that phrase, institutional racism, David Blunkett, in a speech to Black and Asian minority ethnic police officers, say the slogan institutional racism misses the point. It's just a slogan, chucks it out the window. And the reason why I'm saying all of this is because each successive government has operated within constraints set by previous governments when it comes to immigration policy, and then rather than pushing back against them, has deepened them. And why is that? Well, it's because since Thatcher, each successive government has deepened inequalities in this country, deepened wealth inequalities. And what are you going to do? What are you going to do when you have screwed over working class people in this country? You've robbed them of quality employment opportunities. There's no cheap housing. Public services are falling apart. You say, well, you might not be able to move up, but we'll give you an opportunity to punch down. And the reason why that's so appealing is because of those images of demographic apocalypse, of national ruin that's brought by people of colour, particularly from Commonwealth countries, because of Britain's status as a former imperial power. And I think it's important to note, and this is something which a friend of mine called Kojo Karam has written, that it is often said that Britain had an empire. It would be more accurate to say that an empire had Britain. As a country, Britain has never really dealt with the loss of that empire, what it means for people of colour, for Africans, for Asians to come here and demand equal status as citizens. So we had to have a state apparatus constructed to disempower us, to treat us as second-class citizens, for black people who came here as British citizens to be arbitrarily deported. And that's the emotional space that a Corbyn government has to be intervening in. It's not just an economic space. We're talking about politics in the language of emotions, of symbols, and of metaphors. And at first you might think policy's not really equipped to deal with it, but actually I think it is. Like, I hear what you were saying about Labour's position on immigration detention, shutting down Yarl's Wood, shutting down Harmondsworth. That's not good enough. You should shut down every detention centre in this country. Do you know how much it costs to detain someone for a year in an immigration detention centre? Also might have gotten more expensive since the last time I looked up this figure. £33,000 a year. Do you know how much that hypothetical migrant would have been able to claim in benefits if they claimed every single benefit they were entitled to? £26,000 a year because the benefits cap. It's cheaper to give every single undocumented migrant in this country all the benefits that they could have rather than detain them. And the reason why we don't do that isn't because of economics, it's because of racism and our appetite for seeing cruelty done onto other people. So when we talk about what a Corbyn government should be doing, we can't just say, let's get rid of detention centres. We should replace it with a just system which treats migrants as citizens, as people with equal rights to us, and not people who should be policed. I think rather than detaining people, asylum seekers should be supported to access jobs, to access local services, to access education. Also, you can't abscond if you've got something to lose. At the moment, the system is set up in order to get people to mistrust the state rather than to rely on it, which I think of as mad. I think that some of the most exciting ideas which come out of John McDonnell's office, like universal basic income, perhaps universal basic services, these are things which can repair our social fabric, not just by dealing with wealth inequality, but make migrants eligible for those services and for that money too. Because, I hear what you're saying. If someone doesn't have legal status in this country, they're more likely to be exploited. So don't make migrants the target of your policies, make exploitative bosses the targets of your policies, and expand avenues towards regularised status. And I'm just going to leave it here, because I'm not saying this from some position of ultra-leftism, which looks at the imperfect business of putting together a manifesto that can win the support of a country and go, ooh, that's not good enough, I'm not getting involved. I'm saying this from the position of someone who desperately wants a Labour government in this country, because that way I can just fuck off and do what I want, like write about football. But I desperately want a Labour government in this country. But I want it to be a genuinely socialist government. And that means rather than opposing migrants and the working class, you recognise that migrants are an inherent part of the working class in this country, and they always have been.
Okay, thanks so much, Ash. I'd like to introduce our next speaker. It is you, Ben, yes. We're very lucky to have Ben Smoke with us tonight, who was part of the Stansted 15, and I'm going to leave it to Ben to talk a little bit more about his experience around the criminalisation of dissent and resistance, really, to the immigration regime.
Hi. Thanks for making me go after Ash. My name is Ben Smoke. Nice to meet you all. It's nice to be in the north. It's exciting. I basically just chicken scratched this, so bear with me. In 2015, I helped set up a group called Lesbians and Gays Support the Migrants, which was a reaction to the migrant crisis at the time. If you cast your minds back, it was around the time when David Cameron was using language like swarms of people coming here. Katie Hopkins was talking about sending warships into the Mediterranean. It was September 2015 when the picture of baby Alan washed up on the beach made worldwide news. The jungle camp in Calais was getting bigger and bigger by the day, and there was just a general kind of vibe of crisis etching out from every single mainstream media outlet. And so we got together at a house party and decided at about 4 o'clock in the morning that we were going to try and do something about that in the great tradition of queer activism. And so we came together as a group of queer people, as a group of people that know historically what it's like to be at the sharpest end of a campaign of denigration and oppression by a state, and as a group of people that know what it feels like to be scapegoated and recognize that that wasn't in the main us anymore, it was another, and that other were migrants, and that's why we came together, and that's why we started, and we did various different actions. We let our blood in the pools outside of the Home Office, which every time I tell that story now I realize how unchill that was. We glitter bombed things. We did Peckham Pride, which was a kind of community event in Peckham in South East London, which has a big community of people that are directly affected by hostile environment policies. And the more we were doing this, the more it kind of became evident, and this was around 2015, 2016, so the implementation of the Immigration Act 2016, which really solidified a lot of the horrors that were in the Immigration Act 2014, which is what really codified a lot of all of the horrors that were in Theresa May's head. And it kind of became more and more evident as we were doing more things and organizing and making friends and seeing our friends deported and detained and harassed and targeted, that actually there were no amount of marches that were really going to stop this hostile environment train. And so there were various different, I'm being very careful about how I talk about this, because I remember that we had to be very careful in court. So there were various different conversations going on at the same time about what we were going to do about this. And from those conversations emerged the Stansted plan. We knew people that were going to be on that flight, knew of them, we knew their stories, and this was one flight of many. So charter flights were brought in by the Labour Party government. They were brought in 2001. They were so wildly successful that they were expanded in 2002 under a piece of legislation that now escapes me. But it was a new Labour policy, and we knew this was happening, and we thought, well, we have to do something. And so we did. Cut to lying on the tarmac at Stansted Airport. And it's a weird thing. I was thinking about it. I've been kind of writing it up and trying to make it into a thing at the moment, and thinking a lot about that night and the feeling that we were having. And we had a bit of a practice run in the day beforehand. We were in this field somewhere in the west, and running through the drills and locking on and cutting through the fence and stuff. And on the way, in the van from there to Stansted Airport, we read out some of the testimonies of people that were supposed to be on that flight. And one of them was this Nigerian lesbian woman who, if you get the chance, go onto the Detained Voices website, and I think it's March 2017, like 24th of March, but I might be wrong, that it got posted up. And it's harrowing. It's utterly, utterly harrowing. And the final words of that of her statement, of the statement of a woman that was taken by somebody. We were planning a couple of days before and thinking about how we were going to do this action, and one of the Detained Voices Collective were with us, and she stepped out of the room and came back in, eyes puffy, face red, and she'd taken the statement, and the statement ended with, "I am begging." And I remember those words hitting me, and I'd already read them, and I'd already heard them almost firsthand, like mere moments after they were first spoken. I'd heard them, and I'd read them again, and I read them again, and then I read them out in that van on the way to Stansted. "I am begging." And I just thought, like, what? Like, this is the system. This is the system that has been created in this country. It's a system that is designed to make people beg, to make people grovel on their hands and knees for decency, just for human rights, for their right to safety, to things that we take for granted. Like, what? And so, obviously, steeled with that, cut through fence, looked round, sang a bit of Beyonce while I was there, got arrested, was in a cell for a bit, I didn't do some yoga. I told people I did, but I didn't. I actually had a weird sex dream about my ex. I did, yeah. Where was I going with that? Back on track. Yeah, and then we came out, released onto the streets of Essex at 1 a.m. And if you've ever been on the streets of Essex at 1 a.m., it's not the most pleasant place to be. And went back to London, carried on my life. I actually didn't sleep, went straight to, I was bucket shaking the next day for the charity that I worked for. So without sleep, went to Oxford Circus and was stood there shaking a bucket, not 5 hours after I'd been released from a police cell, which was quite surreal. But to me, it was so weird. It was so ridiculous that we were in this same space. We were not 300 yards away from the processing place where people get taken in coaches when they're going to be deported, where people are there begging. This is a fundamentally life-changing moment for them. This means this is life or death. The woman I'm talking about, her husband had contacted her 2 days before she was due to be deported. Her ex-husband had contacted her and said, "I know you're coming. We're waiting for you and we're going to kill you." And then there's me a few hours later just dicking around in Oxford Circus. And for me, that's the hypocrisy of this entire thing, and it's why I always feel like a hypocrite. Oh, bloody hell. It's why I always feel like a hypocrite sitting here and talking, because, like, it was pretty shit. Like, it's not a vibe to be charged with a terror offense and to potentially go to prison for life. That's not really where you want to be. But, like, what does it really matter? What does it matter when we're going to come out at the end of it, whether we go to prison or not? Thankfully didn't. We're going to come out at the end of it. We're going to be with our family, with our safety networks, within the space that we know, with our ability to be able to earn money and to have shelter and to have safety. And I think that's the reality of it, and that's the reality of the hostile environment. And to kind of skirt back to what's been said before about the notion of, like, people with a legal status not being able to stay here. I just think it's nonsense, and I just don't think that we as socialists, we as progressive people, like Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party, I don't know how we can sit here and say that's something we can get behind. Like, why is somebody deemed illegal just because of the basis of the colour of their skin or their passport? Why is somebody deemed to be able to be put in a position where they are going to be murdered because they are a lesbian just because they have a different passport to us? And fundamentally, those are the questions we need to be answering. Yes, there is a huge amount of inequality in this country, and the hostile environment has been used to cover that up, and it has been used to stoke anger within working class communities across this country. And that is why we can't just do this in a vacuum. We have to put it within a program, a full program, a socialist program that is going to actively disengage the inequality that we have seen for decades. But we cannot wrap this racist nonsense, this xenophobic nonsense up in it. We cannot keep talking about people as being illegal. They are people, they are human beings, and they have as much right to safety and security as I do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben, and thank you also for being the best speaker at sticking to your 10 minutes. You were very, very bang on 10 minutes, so we appreciate that. Thanks, Ben. I want to introduce our final speaker, who is Mary Umaru, who hopefully is going to tell us a little bit about her own experience navigating the hostile environment and the immigration system. So I'd like to welcome Mary.
Hello. My name is Mary Umaru. I come from, I was born in Nigeria, but my mother is Scottish and my father is Nigeria. I came to the UK in 1998, February the 8th, but my mother being Scottish as well, so I had access through to the UK. But at the same time, I have two other siblings, two sisters. And when we came, my little sister came on my mother's British passport. My older sister came on a British passport. I came on a Nigerian passport, which had a right of aboard stamp on it. It means I have the right to be in the UK, if I want to leave, if I choose. But when I came in the country, they handed me to, my mother wasn't well, so they handed me to the social services in the UK, but being in the social care and whatsoever, they handled, I was kind of like a juvenile at the time, so they handled my documents. I was too young to hold anything. But anyway, once they took my documents, I never saw it again. Down to education and stuff, I tried to get into education. There was no-go area. Apparently, there was something wrong with my passport at first. That's what they said, that they had a reason to believe that my passport was forged. But when they looked at my document properly, they realized it wasn't forged, it was rushed. You see? So, again, I never got an apology to say, oh, we got it wrong. Anyway, years gone by, I think about 3 years later, I went to, because the care system here I didn't understand it. They weren't doing nothing for me. I wasn't entitled to any income or whatsoever. So I decided to get my dad to the UK, and then in Scotland, I moved to Scotland, which the system over there is totally different. So I ended up doing my education or whatsoever. But it was during my exams time, they said to me, you won't be able to do no examination without your documents. So I thought, oh, Manchester, they've got my documents. Let me contact, the care system that had it. Anyway, I contacted Manchester and they said, oh, we've got a bit of a bad news for you. We've been looking for you. So I said, oh, okay, what's wrong? What's the bad news? Which they told me, our office got robbed, and your document was one of them that happened to be robbed. So I said, okay, what do I do about it now? They said, oh, just come to the office, and we've got a letter for you. So I left Scotland, came back to Manchester, got the letter, and the letter did say, yeah, the office got robbed, which it had, I think, about 6 or 7 different police crime numbers that dealt with the case. So, and on the top of it, it says I should go to Greenhays police station to retrieve the passport because the police found it. So I said, okay, went to the police station, Greenhays. They said, I don't know what I'm talking about. So I said, well, I've got the letter here, so maybe if you go through it and maybe check for the PC numbers and stuff like that, you might be able, to find something. The guy checked it, and then he came back and said, oh yeah, we did have something like that, but we've sent it back to where it come from. So I said, where did it come from? Where did he send it to? They don't know. I said, okay, not a problem. Anyway, time was going past. I decided, like, okay, let me get a job. Couldn't get a job in Manchester. Let me go into university. Couldn't do nothing in Manchester. Couldn't get into uni. So I said, okay, keep pushing. Every job that I got, I only lasted, I think, 3 months minimum, because I had to, lie my way through, my documents on the way and whatsoever. Really, it wasn't on its way. Nobody knew where it was. The passport had the right of abort, so I needed that. But anyway, I, again, ignored it, got a job. This time I was kind of like, okay, I'm going to settle down on this job. Hopefully, if they don't act for nothing, I'll just get on with it, I think about 6 months later, I was working away, got back home, I think, around about 3 a.m., fell asleep on my settee about 4 o'clock, 4:30 in the morning. I had people kicking down my doors. I'm thinking, okay, what's going on here? So anyway, I looked through the keyhole. All I saw was guys with bulletproof and stuff like that. So I'm thinking, oh gosh, what is this? It's not the police, but it was immigration officers. They came round to my property with 12 vans. It was about 12 or 13 of them, right? And for me, it was frightening because I didn't understand, what have I done? But anyway, I refused to open the door. So I heard one of them said, there's somebody in there, because they just seen a shadow. But anyway, they made a comment they were going to come back. So they left. Now, I knew within a week or two, they will be back, because apparently they're going to come with a warrant to break in the property. So why they were kicking my door at the first place? They never had the warrant with them, you see. So they had a week to get the court order to come in on my property, which they did. But anyway, during the process of me waiting for them, at the same time, I was panicking, running up and down, trying to get citizens' advice, somebody to help me out, because the social care system has lost my documents. What do I do? And the people that I go to, they were like asking for all kind of money, like I'm talking, if you can get me £2,000. One of them said, if I can get them £10,000 before 2 o'clock p.m. in the afternoon. And we're talking, it was 11 a.m. in the morning. So I'm thinking £10,000. I've not even got £10, But anyway, I realized that everybody was trying to black me, the people that was going to, the solicitors and stuff, citizens' advice. None of them could help me. You go to the citizens' advice, they end up telling you, oh, we don't deal with that matter. What do you deal with? Why do you call yourself a citizen's advice? Immigration citizens' advice if you do not deal with things like that. But anyway, during the process, ended up, 2 weeks went by. By that time, I lost my job because apparently they had gone to my workplace and told them they're hiring an illegal immigrant. You see, so when I got to the office, I got told, you're not allowed to work here anymore. You never gave us your ID. I said, yes, I did. I gave you my birth certificate. They said, we've lost it. I said, what do you mean you've lost it? That at least could have proved something of me, but I mean, it's a Nigerian birth certificate. So it's either it made things worse or it made things maybe a slight better. But anyway, I left the job, came home. Within a couple of days, they came back again, kicking down my door. I think that this time it was 6 in the morning, kicking down my door. So I opened the door. Once I opened the door, they said they have a warrant to search my property. And if there was anybody else in my home, they could detain if I knew who they were. Clearly, I knew who you were because it says it on your uniform, But anyway, the main reason why they didn't take me into detention that very day, oh Lord, sorry, they didn't take me into detention. At the end, anyway, I got pregnant. They held me. I had to go and sign on in detention, but anyway, they said to me, if I could prove the child that if I could prove to them that I was pregnant, I said yes. Brought them documents for them. Again, they didn't believe it. Had the baby. They wanted DNA. I said okay. Provided the DNA. Anyway, at the end, I managed to get, once I did the DNA, I managed to get my, I ended up getting my papers back. You see, well, not the papers, but a right to remain in the country. You see, now my thing is, the way I got dealt with in the country for 21 years, it's unfair. You see, knowing that my mother was Scottish. My mother, they said she wasn't my mother. My child, they said she wasn't my child. So basically, I was in the country, I've got someone else's child and claiming someone else's mother, which for me, that was out of order, you see. And hopefully, I should be getting a solicitor to sort this matter out, even though I have retrieved something back and I've got my stay now. But the people who put me in the position that I'm in, hopefully I should be doing something about it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mary, for sharing your story with us tonight. We really appreciate you being here. Okay, I think right now we're going to take 2 minutes to collect any last questions that anyone has. Stick your hand up. And I also think that Carmen is going to quickly come on stage and make a little announcement about an important meeting.
Okay. I'm just going to take this moment to say how glad I am to see you on this stage, because when we were all here and the place was full and you were on the phone and your children were down there, that was it was scary for all of us. And I can't say how wonderful it is to see you here and what a power of strength you are to the community. And the reason that I'm up here is to ask any members of Manchester Central Labour Party to join us to support the One Member, One Vote meeting. It's next Thursday, the 13th of June, 7 p.m. in East Manchester. And if anybody needs any transport or anything, we can get you there. It's really important that we, the members of the Labour Party, take it back to make sure that hostile environments don't continue or happen again. Thank you.
Okay, thanks Carmen for that announcement. We're going to move on now to some questions. Thank you everyone for submitting your questions. We've got loads here, so unfortunately we're not going to have time to get through all of them. We've probably got about 15 minutes before Ash and Ben have to dash off, but we're hoping that, you know, afterwards a few of our other speakers will be able to mingle and chat a bit more to people and answer any other questions that you've got. So I'm just going to dive straight in with the questions. I've got a question here, and it is, I'm not sure who it's from, but this question says, how does each panel member understand the relationship between austerity and the hostile environment, remembering that many Labour councils, including Manchester, have implemented austerity? So does anyone on the panel want to speak to that question? Yeah. Ben would like to say something? Go for it, Ben.
I was on, yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, it's intrinsic, isn't it? Like, let's be honest. The reality is that when we're talking about austerity, and we're talking about what's happened to this country under Tory rule, we can't not talk about the hostile environment. The fact that those two things came in together is no coincidence. So my granddad is like a very working class Romani guy who also is like a stalwart member of the BNP. And he used to tell me this story when I was a kid about these two tower blocks somewhere in London, I don't know. He said that there was this one beautiful new tower block. It was empty and it had all of, this was in the 60s, it had all of the mod cons that you could ever want. And next to it was this old, decrepit tower block full of locals, which is granddad language for white people. And it was run down and it was falling down. There was nothing in it. They didn't have any running water. They didn't have toilets. And he'd tell this story every time he'd egg it up. And he talked about standing there one day as a young man looking up at these two tower blocks. And people in the decrepit one, suddenly there was a huge roar and they all came out with flags and I don't know, whatever else. And they ran to the new tower block that was empty, but it was reserved for migrants. And they ran to it and they ransacked it and they took it back for them. And he said that there was a huge human chain of microwaves and washing machines and sinks and fridges and everything going into this old thing. And they took back the power. This is obviously total bullshit. Utter fucking nonsense. But to him, it was, you could, as he was telling it, you could see him rise up, and it was almost like out of Les Mis. You can hear the people sing, and he was there like having a mad one. And that's the point, isn't it? To him, he sees injustice in the world. He sees it. He acknowledges that there is injustice in this society. But he's turned his head to the tower block just across the street, rather than to the ivory towers that have been implementing austerity. And that's why we need to be talking about austerity. That's why we need to be talking about solving injustice in this country if we're going to be talking about fundamentally changing the way that we talk about immigration, because it has been used for generations to mask a neoliberal agenda that has consistently kept the working classes down. And so, yeah, I don't think there's any way that we can extrapolate the two from each other, because they are so inexplicably linked with a kind of a project that is disenfranchising the working classes.
I was just going to say something very quick. So there was a report which came out just this year which showed that because of austerity, the economy in this country is £100 billion smaller than it would have been had it not happened. So we've got to understand austerity not as a response to a crisis, but the implementation of a crisis. Because people benefited from austerity, it just wasn't us. What austerity was part two in a double feature. Part one was privatized profit, and then part two was socialized losses. Austerity wasn't economic management for the many. It was an assets raid. It was theft. It was public money into private hands, and it's the public who must suffer for it. That's what it was. And it has a relationship to the hostile environment because, again, why look up when you can just punch down? But actually, we're lying to ourselves if we think that the only reason why we punish migrants in this country is because lots of people are suffering. Because, like I said, 1968, Callaghan, the Immigration Reform Act, we really liked punishing migrants during the good times too. And that's the uncomfortable truth about British politics, is that we have had centuries of constructing our own economic and geopolitical dominance at the expense of people of colour, whether those people of colour are out there in the colonies or here as migrants. And that's why we need not just, a kind of fuzzy, pinkish, social democratic government to do a bit of tinkering around the edges of how our economy works or how our state apparatus works. We need to fundamentally transform them because we've got centuries of injustice that have led to where we are today.
Thanks, Ash. I think, Afzal, did you want to speak very, very briefly to this question? Very briefly? And then we'll move on and hopefully squeeze in another question before the end.
I want to give our friend time because she's got to go early. Very briefly, I mean, I think at the heart of it, there is a direct correlation and a link between immigration as well and austerity. There's a connection. But the heart of the austerity is a choice the government has made. And if you look at all their policies, what you will see is that for the last 8 years, year after year, there has been cuts to our public services. And the other side you see is cuts for the tax for the riches. It's a choice government has made. I want to make 2 quick points. And the answer ultimately is kicking the government out. Saying that Manchester implements this. Manchester is a great city. Manchester has had amazing progress. Manchester is a labor city, is a flagship city actually, even if you look at the results now, this year's election. So, do they have a choice? And the bit I think we need to understand is that if they don't implement these policies which are set by the government, they will be sidelined and it will be imposed. And that'll be even worse. And I myself have been a councillor in Manchester. I have seen the progress which was being made with the hospitals being built, the show stars being done, all the secondary schools in Manchester being rebuilt new. And then you see, because I was in charge of children's services when it all started, I saw and I was involved with opening a show start center in Cheetham Hill. The facilities which were there, it made me feel like crying because I thought, wow, every child deserves this. They need to have that start. But then when the cuts came in, it's just to say this to you. If somebody builds a house or home and then you're forced to dismantle it, it's painful. Be clear that those councillors who are in Manchester also feel that pain. Sorry? I agree. I agree. That's why I'm saying at the heart of it ultimately is we are the same place. It's not that we're in a different place. So having cheap shots at Manchester Labour Council is not going to actually help anything. What we need to do is get rid of this bloody Tory government. Get a Labour government in there and you'll see the difference.
I'm sorry, I disagree. I think it's fair enough to say that Labour councils, not just in Manchester, but also where I'm from in London, they were drinking the Tony Blair Kool-Aid. And they were all too happy to implement policies which displace the poor. They might not have been happy about dismantling Sure Start, but they were all right with regenerating an estate which meant that it was replaced with luxury houses that people couldn't afford. And I think that that's not a cheap shot. I think that's people who are historically Labour voters. They come from that economic background. Their values are Labour values, saying, where has the party been to protect us? And in those times where you had a choice, why have party representatives not made the right one? I don't think that's a cheap shot. I think that that is the kind of critical engagement which is the lifeblood of left-wing movements.
Okay, I'm going to let Afzal come back. Okay, I'm gonna leave that for discussion for later, I think, yeah, because we are running out of time. I just want to ask if Owen or Mary had anything they wanted to add at this point to the discussion about austerity and the kind of hostile environment. Is there anything that you want to say? No? Okay, no worries. How are we doing for time? Do we have... Okay, I think we have to wrap up, unfortunately. For another question? I think that a couple of our panellists have to dash.
And you guys can keep it going.
Yes, that is an option. Yeah, thanks, Jamil. Yeah. I'm not asking you all to clear out right now. We do need to start wrapping up the conversation, though, I think. I think what I'll do is ask us to give another round of applause for all our speakers on the stage. Thank you. And if Ash and Ben have to sneak off for the train, then so be it. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to do a little bit of a wrapping up now, and there's a few announcements as well before it's all over. So don't go anywhere just yet. So I want to wrap up now with just a few quick points. First of all, there are, I think, a few collection buckets probably knocking around the room now. Give us a wave at the back on the Manchester Momentum table. So any money collected tonight will be used towards the cost of the event tonight, but also we're hoping to put a bit of a donation towards Gaskill Garden Project as well, which is a local migrant solidarity organisation. So do give generously, everybody, if you can and are able to. We'd really appreciate that. I also want to give a quick shout out to Manchester Momentum's other activities. We have a reading group, we've got five-a-side football, we've got a regular Italo Disco night and Northern Soul night. We've also got a summer fundraiser on the 15th of June. So if anyone here is interested in getting involved in Manchester Momentum, any of the above, or if you have any new ideas, then head over to the table at the back. We've got some merch there as well, if anyone wants any. And I guess what I kind of wanted to finish on really was that as Manchester Momentum, we're really keen to take this energy in this room with all these amazing people. We're really keen to take this energy forward, working with other organisations and artists and musicians and activists and poets and whoever else. We want to take that forward and try and build on the work that's already been happening. I think as members of the Labour Party as well, we also need to be working with national momentum. We have democratic power as members to push policy, and so those of us in the Labour Party can be pushing motions in our CLPs. I know there's a momentum-backed motion going around currently, which focuses on ending all detention, as far as I'm aware. So maybe that's something that we can start mobilising around. Finally, I wanted to say that tonight has been, really has been a collective effort. So massive thanks to the rest of the organising team, to our volunteer film crew, to Uncle Steve for the food, big up Uncle Steve, to our sound guy Nick, thank you, for NIAMOS for hosting us, and for providing this really stunning venue. I think I'm going to stop talking. So continue talking amongst, let's keep talking to each other. I'm going to shut up, and can we just have like one last thank you to our speakers and for all you lot for coming. Thank you. And one final thing is exit through the back door, please. And also, how dare I forget that Jamil wanted to have a little word with you all, I think, before you all scarper.
Very, very little. So basically, firstly, there's, in terms of people wanting to continue this conversation outside of the space in this one event, we're going to have at the back here, there's the Momentum stall where there are two signatures, petitions for two gentlemen, Levi and Noah, who are part of the MDC movement. Levi is here. He's going to be stood at the back, and he's a member of the resistance movement in Zimbabwe. He's currently seeking asylum and refuge in Manchester. So if people could just at the very least, just put their petition, their email down into that petition, it's going to make a massive difference to the members of the Zimbabwean community who are engaged at the moment with all the organisations that have been represented tonight. Sign the bloody petition, very simple. And then we're also, Owen is going to be signed at Dallas Court and his event on the 14th of June. Do you want to talk about that briefly, or? On the 14th, for why it is everybody here should be outside Dallas Court Reporting Centre. Do you want to take a minute? Mike. So yeah, if next week, put it in your calendars. If you're free, it's a 8:30 start, but the Home Office want you there early. So Mike.
Yeah, get my cup as well.
Hey guys, I'm helping run Owen's campaign at the moment. We're doing a thing in conjunction with all the various charities that have been helping Stand Up to Racism, RAPAR. On Friday the 14th of June at 8:30 a.m, Dallas Court is just in Salford. If you Google the address, it comes up in Google Maps. Owen has an immigration sign-in every Friday morning, and we're just basically doing it as a show of strength a week on Friday. So if people want to turn up, it's not going to be a kind of crazy protest, but we just want, mainly kind of for the media purposes and to just to sort of drive home the fact that Owen is not yet safe. This is an ongoing case, he's in legal limbo, and we don't know how long this will go on for. So if people are around, maybe before work, a week on Friday, Friday the 14th, 8:30 a.m, just Google Dallas Court and you'll find the address. Thank you.
So, the information for Owen's protest is going to be put on the NIAMOS event and probably posted on the Momentum event tonight. The last thing is, we're not in a rush. If people would happily, if you could take your chairs and push them to the side, we're all volunteers, no one's getting paid, so we're just going to stack them on the side and then load them up. Secondly, we're going to put the music on. Everyone chill, have a conversation, and please meet everybody here, sign up at the back and get involved in a wider conversation beyond this event, because there's a lot of work to do for the next year. So, back to Scarlett, and thank you all for coming.
I'm done, thank you. Okay, Nick is saying please leave the chairs, do not move the chairs, thank you.